Hello, my name is Fergus Collins. I'm the editor of BBC Countryfile Magazine, and I'm the host and creator of the Plodcast, which is the Countryfile Magazine podcast. Now, I've been invited along today to talk about podcasting and the whole process of making these audio treats. I've been making the Plodcast for 2 years now, and we get about 25,000 downloads a month, which I'm told is pretty good for a new podcast. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a chat about the journey I've been on and to share some of the things I've discovered, which I guess will help, I'm hoping will help if you just love listening to podcasts or have never listened to them before, or indeed if you fancy creating a podcast yourself. And so really, it's a good place to start is, what is a podcast? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's just a radio show that's amateurish radio show, which I've often heard. And it is, I agree with that. It's audio, but it's not produced with quite perhaps the same amount of studio work and editing that a big radio show might have. But I think there's something else about them, and they're not new. Podcasts have been around, well, since the 1990s. I certainly was working on podcasts back in the early 2000s. But it's the last few years, perhaps the last decade, that they've really grown. And exponentially, they're growing and growing each year, bigger and bigger audiences. So what is it that's different, and why are people tuning in such big numbers? Well, the big difference between podcast and a typical radio show, I think, is that podcasts can be really, really niche. One of the things about the internet is it opened up all these opportunities for people with quite niche hobbies and interests and passions to find other people who are interested in that. It can be hugely comforting to find a podcast that actually addresses something that you really love, whether it be woodwork or Tolkien, for example, is a really good example of, I loved Lord of the Rings as a kid, so I was looking up Tolkien podcasts, and there are lots of them. And one of the fun things is they go chapter by chapter, analysing what is a monstrously big book. And a delight for anyone who loves Tolkien. For Tolkien nerds are well served by podcasts. So any subjects you're interested in, there's no more searching around the airwaves or waiting for it to come on. You can find it at a click, and it's completely free. So that's wonderful. They can be any length, which again is there's a lot of debate about what the perfect length for a podcast should be, and I might come back to that later because I've done a little bit of experimenting. But essentially, you're not sort of constrained by a schedule because it can be listened to any time. So you're not suddenly cutting to the news and that's the end. Just as you're getting into it, you're cutting to the news or Moneybox or something like that. So it gives you great freedom to tell a story in a different way. Take your time. It can be the length of the podcast is as long as you need to tell the story. Self-indulgent editing can be a problem though, so that's something I'll also talk about a bit later. Podcasts have a realism and honesty about them. They're made by people with passion, with a particular passion, and that can sometimes be lost, that raw connection, in really polished, edited radio. And I think that's quite interesting that that connection can be incredibly comforting. I think particularly during lockdown and with our podcasts, which offer an escape into the countryside, people have wanted that personal, like being spoken to directly, addressing, feeling like you're in a little club, I suppose. Ira Glass, who's a presenter and producer of podcasts, particularly This American Life, which is a really great podcast. He says what differentiates a podcast is directness and authenticity rather than distance and formality. And I think that's a good way of summing it up. So it's that comforting voice, that connection that you have, that you keep coming back to. So yes, they're easy to find and can be listened to any time. So great, that's a podcast. I just want to give a little taster then of some of that sort of slight informality, that personality charm. Well, I hope that comes across. This is an interview that my friend Annabel Ross, who is an ex-BBC radio producer, did with Tim Smith of the Eden Project, but also here he is giving us an exploration of the lost gardens of Heligan in Cornwall, and it's a lot of fun.
This is live podcasting. The BBC normally pays extra for this, doesn't it?
I don't know how much of this is going to stay in, because we can't do a whole podcast on a sort of unidentified dinosaur egg, can we?
In the old days you could, when you were good, But now you've become a bit bourgeois and beige. I suppose not. You probably want to talk about Colleen Rooney or something. No, but I don't know. Yeah. Now look, this is the moment of theatre, okay? This is the rumble in the jungle.
What's your name?
Bethany.
Bethany. Hi.
Yeah. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, I think yes, and then I blame you. That's fantastic.
Oh, I think that sounds really promising.
This is where Nicola comes in and bursts into tears and says, "This was going to be my prize entry in next week's garden show."
Oh gosh, it's a melon.
Oh my God!
It's a melon. Is it?
Wow.
Are you going to eat it?
I don't know that I ought to, but it smells like a melon. Look.
It smells
actually
like a cucumber.
It smells like that's exactly. Look, it is a cucumber, isn't it? Oh, it does smell like a cucumber, doesn't it?
That's really good.
It does. I tell you what, life is too short to not have a bite.
Yeah, I love that clip, and so that's a super podcast, and you can listen to that for free anytime. So why make a podcast? They are lovely to make, great fun, but I can't just do it as a hobby. We've got to do it for sort of sound commercial reasons. 10 years ago, I was appointed to be editor of Countryfile Magazine, and it was mostly a print editor. Text, pictures, traditional articles, a beautiful physical printed product at the end of it. But over those years, things have changed hugely in the magazine industry, and people are accessing their content, magazine-style content, through the internet, through social media, and increasingly through audio, through podcasts. And this phenomena has surged along like a horse on the inside rail in a race. It's become a kind of unbelievable rise in numbers. And so it's become part of an editor's armoury, as well as the print magazine and a website and other bells and whistles. It's a good idea to make a podcast so that you're drawing people into the brand still and reaching those people who might not pick up a magazine. And they're popular. So we know that every week, 6.5 million adults in the UK listen to podcasts. Now that's probably risen. That was a figure from before the first lockdown. And that's incredible numbers, and it's growing all the time. So there's a huge audience who can be introduced to the Countryfile Magazine brand. We also know a few other things about them. That peak age for listening to podcasts at the moment is 25 to 34 years old, and more men than women listen at the moment. And key time for listening to podcasts, again, this is before the lockdown, but it's 8 a.m. to 8:15 a.m. So I'm imagining commuting or the school run, that sort of thing. And it's a huge difference between podcasts and videos. That you can drive while listening to a podcast. You can do the ironing while listening to a podcast. I talked about that sharing of a passion for podcasts. We look at that and think, what is our passion? What's our niche? Well, it is the countryside. It is sharing that connection. That there's a whole new way of connecting to people beyond beautiful images and wonderful wordsmithery in a print magazine. So the audio side of things, there is so much. When I walk, particularly in spring, but there's bird song, the sound of a stream trickling off one of the Brecon Beacon peaks here, wind in the trees, sound of farm machinery, the soundscapes describe, and then with some description, creates this, if done well, and we're getting better at it, it can be very effective. And we found that through that there's a lot of people who can't get to the countryside, can't get to explore these soundscapes as much as they would like to. And, for various reasons, a lot of people are, work and family commitments drain people of time and energy for their own adventures. So there's a potential group of people there who just want that escape. And that's particularly under lockdown when people couldn't get out into the countryside. We doubled our listenership. But there's also been a solid, dependable constituency of listeners who, with impaired mobility or vision, whose enjoyment of the countryside has been reduced, but actually we can create those soundscapes, give them that sense of immersion, which they're not going to get through the magazine in the same way. And I've had lots of fantastic feedback, quite moving feedback from people who say how much they've enjoyed coming on adventures with me and with some of my fellows. And one of the fun things is not every podcast, we set out with an aim of perhaps this is our storytelling arc of finding a specific species. But the huge difference is sometimes we don't find that species and the podcast still has to go ahead. So on perhaps the second most popular podcast I've ever done was hunting for nightingales with a friend in a woodland in Gloucestershire. And we arrived at peak time, perfect still evening in early May when nightingales sing their hearts out. The previous year, 10 had sung there. None sang. And I was very disappointed. So we chatted and we recorded, and I went back and I, very disheartened, edited it and put out the podcast. But actually we'd recorded some really fun conversations. It helps that we'd had a couple of pints beforehand, but we recorded some really fun and actually it was made better because we joked about the times when we have travelled great distances to see spectacular wildlife and drawn a blank. But there are times when I've been recording and something magical does happen.
Great white bird flying low across the grass, quartering. It's a barn owl. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to keep very still. It's coming down the track towards me. It's literally flying at me. It's closer. It's about 2 feet from the ground. I cannot believe this. It's a barn owl coming right past me. It's so exciting. Here it comes. Here it comes. Right. It literally is right beside me. And it saw me and it flew off.
I'm always slightly embarrassed listening to that again, but it was an absolutely incredible experience. And I've had quite a lot of those captured on the Plodcast. So that's what I'm aiming for, is to create those special moments. We've also got interviews with people, but essentially I am trying to take people into the countryside, give them a little treat. So that's our niche. But there's lots of other things to do to create a podcast. So I'll run through a few little pointers. You've got to have some kit. Now, this is the real joy of podcasting. You don't need tons of expensive kit. I basically have, this is a Zoom recorder. Costs about £100, just over £100. Really simple to operate. And it looks cool. But if you're recording outside, you also need one of these funny little hats, which goes on the top of there. So that becomes like a little minion who travels around with me. And that's the key thing. I have a little handle and I put some earphones in. I've made terrible mistakes of recording on Easter Sunday. Pretty wonderful day this year. Beautiful spring day. And there was no traffic due to lockdown. So I walked along the A40 thinking myself very clever to record a podcast on a main road listening to birdsong. But I didn't have my earphones in. and I had a really whistly nose that day. So although I captured some really and some birds that I've never captured before or since, and it was a lovely story to tell. When I listened to it back, it was just the sound of sort of a wheezy old man, which is extremely disappointing. So headphones, really important. Then I've just experimented all the time, but I've always kept in mind to have some sort of story arc. So it's generally, when I'm out, it's a quest. So it's very simple. There's a journey to see the species, the honey buzzard, the nightingale. There's the tension, trying to build some tension of do I or don't I see it? And then there's a sort of reflective, and that's a really important thing about podcasts, is the reflective part towards the end. I think that's something which, again, Ira Glass talks a lot about, is this live reflection is really important. We don't do enough of it on radio or in audio. So you've got your audio, it's recorded onto this thing, onto the memory card inside. That needs to be downloaded, and it does need to be edited. Despite me saying over-editing is a problem, self-indulgent non-editing is also a bigger problem, and you have to be hard and cruel to yourself. Now, the one absolute core thing is that you can download a free piece of software called Audacity, and that is, I've taught myself to use it, and I'm getting better at using it over the years, but it's a really quick way of just editing. It displays your sound as a visual sound waves, and you just chop bits out, move them around, and there it's simple. Here's a little still of Audacity. And yeah, how long should it be? How long do you edit it down? How long do you leave in? Well, lovely that podcasts can be, there's this freedom to leave. You know, I haven't done one over an hour long, and I think I don't have the confidence that people will listen that long to what I'm offering. I think they've got to be ideally around 30 to 40 minutes. I think that's about the length of the average commute, not that people are commuting in the same numbers as before, which also could have an impact on podcast listens. If people aren't commuting, who knows where we'll be. But at the moment, things are still strong. What should I leave in a podcast? Well, I sometimes have been ruthless at taking out all the errors and mistakes that I make, of which that's the thing I'm most professional at, is making lots of errors. But people tell me those are the things that actually make the rest of it worthwhile. You need that colour, that sort of silliness sometimes, to feel it's real, to feel that I'm a real person when I'm making these things. So here's a good example of something that I left in, which it is not a mistake. This is an interview I did with Paul Whitehouse. So it is a straight telephone interview, and pre-Zoom. So the quality's not perfect, but there's this little story that we discussed off-air about leaving it in or out. I'm glad we left it in.
I have tipped my dad into 3 rivers in various parts of the country, and I did make a joke, which we cut out, because it is quite funny, which is that if they did an archaeological dig and came up with it, his ashes were mixed in with 2 of his dogs. Right? So if they found, it's like in about 1,000 years, if somebody did some kind of archaeological dating, they'd see, what is this? A dog man? I've never seen such a species. But then, of course, there are 2 other sites 300 miles away, which would confirm the existence of this species.
Yeah,
because
only found
we
in
have
rivers.
Fragments. Yeah, aqua dog human.
And they cut that out, did they? What a shame. So that's Paul Whitehouse. Lovely little story. And it was interesting. He was happy for me to include it in the podcast, but it didn't go into the TV series. And in a way, their TV series, the fishing series, is a sort of visual podcast, if that's not an oxymoron. But it's that gentle, reflective, and it would be a perfect podcast as well as a beautiful visual thing that it is. So you've edited your podcast, and then there's this. That's the easy bit. There's this horrible gap between how do you find an audience, between making your podcast and how do you find an audience. And the key thing is there are podcast providers out there who are growing, who are learning, because it's all new still, who are learning and you just need to talk to them. You just give them a call. So we use Acast, who are excellent, and they essentially host the podcast and then they broadcast it out to all the different podcast providers. So iTunes, Spotify, any of the podcast apps that you might have on your phone or websites. So it goes out to them, and they then provide you with the statistics of how many people are listening. They also will add in some adverts, so that's how you make a bit of money from your podcast. And I'll come a little bit further to how to make money on podcasts, which is that's the tricky bit. So you will need to sell your podcast through explaining what its ultimate selling point is. It's USP. It's what are you offering that someone else isn't offering at the moment. So that's an important thing to do. Obviously, with Countryfile, it's an easier job because it's a big brand. People know about it, and there's almost a why hasn't Countryfile been doing a podcast? So we pushed as an open door, but thousands and thousands of other podcasts have opened that door too. So it's an easier way. It's far easier than launching a magazine, which is a massive undertaking these days and pretty foolhardy unless you've got an absolute winner on your hands. So podcasts, how do they make money? Well, which is a crucial thing, but not utterly crucial for me. It's as much about finding a wider audience and meeting more people and kind of drawing them into loving the countryside and perhaps enjoying some of our other products and other content. But it would be nice to make money. And so you make money from adverts primarily, but also sponsorship. And the more listeners you have, the more downloads you get, predictably, the more money you get. So a lot of work. We're doing a lot of work now on how we make a few quid out of the podcast. But it's cheap to make. It is time consuming of my time. But it is not. My own passion drives it on. But one thing I would leave you with as the absolute would sort of take things onto the next level, and one thing that I found most helpful is this fantastic book called it's an American book, Out on the Wire. Hopefully will not be coming the other not appear reversed on this. Out on the Wire. It's by Jessica Abel, and the storytelling secrets of the new masters of radio. It's a very interesting sort of, it's like a graphic novel, so it's told in cartoon style, but actually it's the representation of lots of meetings and lots of interviews that she did. Jessica Abel is an artist, but she's just gone through with lots and lots of the great American podcast presenters and producers to what are the recipes for success. It's an amazing book full of incredible insight. It won't work for every podcast, and some of the sort of crime podcast storytelling isn't quite as relevant for what I'm trying to do, but it's a valuable book, and I highly recommend it. So do have a listen to our podcast. You can find it at countryfile.com/podcast or on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever. Have a listen. I'd love to get some feedback because I'm still learning on the job. But my main thing I would say is if you love listening to it, if you've got this sort of itch to do something creative and new, and you love new media, there's nothing better than kind of going out with a microphone, interviewing someone, or developing your passion through audio, because there's a growing audience for it, and you might find that you've created a whole new conversation and a whole new audience, and perhaps something like a whole new career, like I have. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in, and you can contact me, editor@countryfile.com, editor@countryfile.com, if you ever want to have a chat about one-to-one about the podcast and podcasting. Take care now. Goodbye.